Hi, Alia. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. How are
Yeah,
you?
I'm very good, thank you. I've been genuinely looking forward to this conversation. I think you have got a fascinating story. There are so many places that we could start. Let's start at the beginning. What do you think your earliest memory of showing ADHD traits was?
I have been thinking about this a lot because I only got my diagnosis last year. So I'm 33 this year. So obviously just turned 32 when I got my diagnosis. So for me to unpick that in my own head, I've had to kind of look backwards to be able to look forwards, if that makes sense. And it's really interesting because obviously having ADHD, you just have it. That's just the way you are. It's the way you're wired. And there were always things about my childhood that I just thought were me, that were quirky, that were, a bit different. But it was really obvious actually, because looking back, it was things like I was always fidgety. School, I was not disruptive, but because I found it quite overwhelming and difficult, I just walk off.
Mm.
So I remember in like little school, I would, often I would just walk into another classroom to go see my friend because my best friend Vicky, we were in like, I don't know, year 3 or 4. And the way our school was, you'd go across the hallway and you had two different like form rooms. And I would just think, this is boring. And I would just sneak across, go on a little adventure and just go
Mm.
sit in the back of the class. I would do that so often that the teachers were just like, "Just do it, it's fine." And just things like, I remember one of the things I forgot I did this actually. I used to pull the downstairs, under the stairs in my dad's house. We used to have this cupboard, the everything cupboard.
Mm. Oh, yeah, of course.
I used to, because my parents, I'm estranged from them, but like my dad is a hoarder and I used to hate it. And I think, right, I'm going to clean this out. I'm going to organize it. I'm going to make it look really fancy. And I would pull the whole cupboard out. I remember doing this. And then I'd get distracted, realize it was a really boring thing to do. And instead, I don't know if you remember, do you remember Ready Steady
Yeah, of
Cook?
course, with Ainsley Harriott, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
they used to have these like ring binders where you'd get like recipe cards and it would have like the green peppers and the red tomatoes or whatever on the front. And I just remember sitting cross-legged in my kitchen, surrounded by pots and pans and like piles of stuff, reading all the recipes, thinking, "Oh, I'm going to cook this one day." And I was like 10. um, I think like looking back, it was a bit obvious.
Mm.
But it just things like that, just getting distracted really easily.
Were you quite sociable when you were at school? Did you have? I know you mentioned a friend there. Did you have a large friendship group, or did just a couple of friends?
No, I would say. So there's lots of different things. So kind of my childhood affected things. I started working when I was 12. So like at weekends, I was, working with my dad on a Sunday. And I got bullied a lot actually. And I got bullied year 7, year 8 and year 9. Year 9, I just retaliated, I would say politely. And then year 10 and 11 was better, but I was quite quiet. I was kind of kept to myself. I think people enjoyed the fact that, as kids do, the kids are terrors, aren't they? I think they knew that if they wind me up, I would explode,
Mm.
which obviously was just me not being able to regulate my own emotions. And so I'd often just get kicked out and put into isolation. So I think half the time was the kids just finding joy in watching me kick off. And then
Mm.
the other half was me enjoying the silence and being like, okay, well, if I do this, I can go and sit in a room on my own. So was I social as a kid? Probably not. Probably not social as an adult, to be honest.
No, I only asked the question because for me it's fascinating because I'm not. I had a couple of friends in
Yeah.
school and I've got a couple of friends now, but I prefer to keep myself to myself. And I haven't asked that question to anyone else yet, so I was just interested to hear your answer. And yeah, it rings true. It's very relatable. And have you? Do you think you've got any better at the regulating of the emotions if someone winds you up, but not now or at any time in between school and now?
Yes, it's a very complicated answer, but yes, I did a lot of work and I kind of did a lot of therapy. I did a lot of mindset coaching, and I kind of am picking it like my dad had a temper, and I always used to think, oh, I was just like my dad. There are moments where, and gladly when I'm on my own. So I used to isolate myself a lot just because if I did kind of flare off the handle, I didn't want to, it's embarrassing. Now I'm a 32-year-old woman and if I've got sensory issues in the car, I will have a tantrum, but like, because I know nobody else is there. It's difficult. I think as an adult, you can't just, like you might, as in a kid in a supermarket, you might throw yourself on the floor, kick and scream and just not be very happy with general life around you. But I think you have to, don't you? You have to learn to bite your lip. I have learned to not be triggered in the first place for some things. But there are times where, there are triggers. I mean, for example, it's a stupid trigger, but we're in my house, like a housing estate, sorry, that we've got like bays rather than driveways. And they're numbered, they've got your house on them. And then if people there's lots of Airbnbs, and it's so stupid, but if somebody parks in my bay instead of just parking in the free areas where they should, have you ever what's that? Have you ever seen that Disney movie, where they're all the different colours, the emotions? Have you seen it?
No, I don't think I have, actually.
Oh no, I'm gonna have to come back to this one. But yeah, it's just you feel like the red mist, and you're just a parking spot. So I have with great difficulty, but sometimes it can still be a challenge.
How can other people be so stupid? they're numbered. It's so clear.
I am so close to getting some spray paint for the pavement, not the cars.
Do you remember what your school reports said about you?
No, I can't, to be honest. I know that my teachers often thought I was difficult. Not all of them. Mr. Clark in particular, my science teacher, I loved him. He had the greatest teaching method, and he was so cool and nice and made things so easy to understand. So we got on. But my math teacher, math is still not my strength. I'm a words lady. And my math teacher would just go red in the face, and she'd just say that I was just, absent-minded, difficult, trying to just cause issues for the rest of the class and disruptive. I just didn't get it. And then you try and explain that I'm really struggling. And even then, this was it's in adult school. So I think year 10 or something, I would say, look, can I just go in the other maths class like I used to in primary school? And they said, no, this is your set. And so in the end, I just walk off. I just go in the other class again, because nobody was listening. That it just didn't go in. So I think that my teachers just generally just thought I was a bit of a nuisance more than anything.
It's so interesting to hear you say phrases like absent-mindedness, because I've interviewed 4 women now on this podcast, and one of the men I've interviewed as well, none of them have what I would say are the stereotypical, well, they have some of them, but they haven't said their primary traits are what you would consider to be the main stereotypical ones if you were to Google the symptoms or the traits of ADHD. Yeah. I think there's such a gap between what a lot of people think ADHD is and how it actually presents itself. So when was ADHD first mentioned in your life? When did it first come into your sphere of consciousness?
So it was a year ago. It was really weird because the week before it actually arrived, the guy I went on a date with off whatever app, he just mentioned ADHD to me. And I remember at the time thinking that was a bit weird. So there's a tiny story to it. So I'll tell you. So I have always had terrible memory, and my memory is awful. And that's probably my biggest problem. And I think when you think about that, it's not just, I can't remember yesterday. It's things like forgetting to change your driving license, and then forgetting to do your MOT, and then all the background stuff that comes off the back of that. And so I'd never thought about that in the frame of perhaps it's an executive dysfunction disorder, or whatever the science is. In 2012, so I was 22, I got hit by a car. And I was cycling. I had a helmet on, thankfully. And a woman who was text driving had her face down. I could see her. And she just put her foot down, drove out into me. And I went headfirst into the windscreen and ended up in hospital. And at the time, I got concussion, which is really hard to kind of diagnose in terms of, well, how long does that last? And so I remember even what I do now. So I would, if I meant to say tomorrow, I'd say yesterday by accident, and I would have these weird blackout things. And I would now what I know to be just when you dissociate from whatever your reality is and you just switch off, that would happen. And that never really became apparent to me until that crash. So I always just put that down to the concussion. And in the first 6 months, it was really bad. And it started to kind of meander away, but then it never really left. And so I always just thought, well, maybe I have brain damage, or, maybe just when I because the way that just the doctor described it to me at the time is it sounds like you've hit your head so hard and things were moving about that they haven't quite stopped moving about yet. And so I was never really aware of these things, even though I look back and see it was always a problem. It was just worsened, I guess, by the head trauma. So I just thought, maybe my head doesn't work anymore. So there was that, and I went on believing that, and thinking that maybe I was just, a bad human, or I just couldn't do stuff, or maybe I was just stupid or broken. And on top of the head issue, I also thought I was going deaf. So the reason that is because whenever I go out into a social situation, if I go out with my friends, which is why I hate social situations, other than the fact my ability to read a room is one of the reasons I hate most rooms, is I would go anywhere if you're going for food or drinks, and I'd have an awful time because you just spend the whole time lonely because you can't hear anyone. It's so loud and there's so many people and you get stressed, and then obviously I'm angry because I'm like, people bumping into you. And I thought because my friends could talk to each other in a loud room in a nightclub, and I'd just be stood there like, what are you trying to say? And then after the 6th or 7th time of asking your friends to repeat themselves, you just in the end, you just, oh yeah, you just nod and smile and you just crack on, and you just spend the whole night oblivious to what anybody was saying, right? And so this got quite bad where I would be, my brain and my ears together, so I'd be forgetting clients' names and I wouldn't be able to hear people, and I stopped taking phone calls because without being able to see people's mouths, there'd be like a delay, and I was like, right, I think my hearing is going. So I went private first of all to get my ears checked out, and they said you've got a perforated eardrum and you need a hearing aid. So I was like, right, okay. It was going to cost about $4,000. So I thought, well, I pay my taxes, I'll go for the NHS instead. So I went to the NHS, who did more testing and did it in a lot of depth. And I was really lucky actually because the doctor, had a hearing aid, and he was also neurodivergent himself. So he obviously knew what to look for. So we went through these tests, and he said to me, with the exception of the sounds like so like T and then FT, or TH, sorry. He said, with the exception of those, you've actually got really good hearing. And I was like, right, okay. And he basically told me through showing me the science and the screen and whatever. He said, your hearing's really good. You don't have a hearing problem. And I said, well, okay, I understand what you're saying based on what we're looking at. I said, but why is it that when I'm out and about and I'm in these environments, why is it that my experience is my experience? Because, your graphs on the screen isn't going to minimize that for me. And he said to me, I don't think you have a hearing problem. He said, I think you have an attention problem. And that just set me on a whole catalyst of, oh, wow, okay. Like, well, what do you mean by that? And I went, so I went private with, it was a bit unorthodox. I got a screening by somebody who I know. So I didn't go through the channels. We've done the proper examinations to say, yeah. And for example, the assessment that usually takes her 1 hour, we took 3 hours because we were just going through everything. And that's how that kind of came to be.
That's fascinating. Really fascinating. So you went on a date and it was mentioned by someone, and then you had this bike incident, and that made you aware of what you thought was a hearing issue, and then that took you to the doctors, and the doctor was neurodivergent, and they said, have you ever thought about getting assessed for ADHD? And that's probably quite a unusual route to diagnosis.
Yeah, it was just like, because obviously that was over like a 10-year period. So the crash was 10 years ago, and that led me to believe I was just, I was just damaged. I just thought I had brain damage. And then the hearing thing has been as long as I can remember. So that's been just going on. And then they're the kind of things that you just live with. You don't think anybody else is having a different experience, and you don't think that your experience is different to the point that if you did something about it, you would have a better quality of life. And so it was literally, the guy was just random for saying that. He was the only person to pick up on it. But because of the hearing problems and finally thinking, look, I'm going to try and do something, it was that doctor that said, that was the catalyst. And it was mad because once I had my diagnosis, I told, people that I knew, because at first I felt a bit embarrassed. I felt a bit ashamed. Don't know why. There's nothing to be ashamed of. And nobody was surprised. And a lot of people, like my closest people that have known me, like, as long as the longest person has known me, I guess, since I was about 15, they're like, oh yeah, I could have told you that. Well, why didn't you? Like, did you not think to mention it? And it was crazy because like I said earlier, I'm estranged from my my dad. I grew up with my dad. My mum left when I was younger, and we don't talk for various reasons. But he's my only access to like medical information, like family history, because I left home at 16. And so, you're a kid. I'm 32 now. That was half my life ago. So I just kind of reached out to him and just said, look, I'm going through this diagnosis. I'm going through this journey. Just wondered if you could, shed some light in this direction. And I don't often trust much he's got to say. So he said to me, yes, runs in the family quite heavily. Like he's, I can't remember. I think he's got ADHD and autism as well, because I suspect he might have autism, but I'm still going through that journey. And so I just said to him, like, why is it you think I'm, neurodivergent? And so he listed all these things. And I remember reading this list and just thinking, damn, yeah, I still do all of that now. And so just kind of set me off on that path, really.
I know you said that after you got the diagnosis, you felt ashamed and embarrassed for various reasons. After I got my diagnosis, I went through a wave of different emotions. Did you find that you kind of started with maybe frustration or anger, or maybe just you didn't really think that it changed anything, or did you maybe then look back at your life and think, that and that and that behavior was attributed to this diagnosis? And did you go through waves of feelings after the diagnosis?
Yeah, I would say I still do, I think, because, it's only been a year. So at first it was relief, actually, because it was this whole feeling of, oh, maybe I'm not broken. Maybe I'm not, an idiot. Maybe I don't need to isolate myself from the world, because, there are people that do think like me. And even though I do think differently and potentially wired differently, or whatever, the science is, it just kind of made me feel less alone. Because before that point, I would isolate myself so much. And what we were saying earlier about having friends, like, I have amazing people in my life, but I've always kept them at arm's length. And part of that's just because I felt, without realizing, I kind of felt and knew I was different, but didn't know why. And then I didn't want people to see that I was different, and it was just easier to be separated. And so having an understanding of myself really started to allow me to kind of knock down the walls I made within myself in the first place. And I would say, actually, even though I'm still on a journey, it's given me a much better quality of life. The first thing I did, I'm quite a proactive and intuitive person. So I like information. I like to understand stuff. And so the first thing I did was I just got an Insta, and I just followed like every ADHD group I could get my hands on. And what I found really cathartic was, the posts are great, obviously, but generally it's the comments. And so if you see something and you think, oh yeah, I didn't realize that was a thing. So the most random, I will give you an example that I saw, and I don't know if you do this or any of the listeners do, but a neurodivergent trait can be things with textures. So if I have a drink, I'll always have like 3 liquids, especially if I have a hot drink. If I have a hot drink, I have to have a cold drink. If I've got a glass of wine, I have to have lemonade. And often I like water as well. And it's having those different flavors. And I just thought that was a normal thing. Apparently it's a neurodivergent thing. Don't ask me why, I don't know. But apparently it's not normal. People don't do that. And so I would see this on a post, and people would say, oh, I do that. And there's so many just like little qualities and traits, and you just think, okay, right, like I get it. Yeah, I see that now. And for me, I found it, and it's not an excuse, like it's more not feeling alone, I think.
Social media.
That was my initial. Sorry, go on. And social media.
Oh, social media is such a powerful tool for building that community and making you aware of content that might open your eyes or make you aware or make you feel less alone, to doing various things that we do. Things like you just said, you saw that there are other people that do hot drinks with cold drinks and wine with lemonade. But it was a group of people, maybe on an ADHD page or an autism page, and that maybe, was the kicker that made you think, I'm not alone. I think it's such a powerful tool. It's so helpful if you can find those communities on Instagram, in your case.
Yeah, I would say that. I think that's the thing that's made the journey easier, because what I found a challenge, and they, to be fair, like the friends and the people I have in my life, they're so sweet and they're understanding. There has been some others that have been, we're not friends anymore. Just trying to think of a nice way to say it. And they try their best, but as much as, I think differently to them, they think differently to me. And so sometimes when you are trying to talk things through, because they don't see the world in a similar way to me, they have to try to understand it first to be able to talk about it. And then it's kind of like, well, I'm learning myself, so it's not my job to educate you to be my ally. And there's this whole friction, and it's a bit frustrating, and it adds to that, I'm not feeling heard, or no, that's not quite it. And so I stopped doing that, because that wasn't a useful way. Even though they tried their very best, it wasn't a useful way to have those conversations. And so for me, and if somebody's kind of at the start of their journey, I would say definitely like finding a community, even if it's just on Instagram. I mean, I started a page and hid it so that nobody would know it was me, just for the same reason. And I've already had messages saying, look, that's exactly how I feel. And, it's so, obviously I'm not a doctor or a scientist, and nothing I say here is factually accurate. I can only speak to my experience. But sometimes I even coming onto this podcast, I was thinking, do I really have ADHD? Am I just making a bit of a fuss? Am I just this whole imposter syndrome thing? Am I just am I just pretending? But then when you look at these posts and channels and communities and whatever they are, and you relate to so much of that stuff, all these comments and experience of other people, you're not faking anything. You're just living your lived experience. And it kind of, I found it so useful just to be able to accept myself for who I am, really. And like in terms of like masking and things, I know we'll maybe talk about that a bit later, but in terms of like masking and just hiding all the things that make me, I kind of stopped doing that. And I think that's really good, because actually I'm pretty cool as a person. I don't mind saying that. I've got a lot of really good qualities. And when I was so focused on trying to hide myself because I was ashamed of maybe who I was hiding all of myself, and that was kind of a disservice to even just me, really.
You said there that you don't hide yourself, and you don't. Did you say that you don't mask anymore?
I'm closer to not. It's still a process, but I used to mask everything, and there's still times I hide. But I would say I'm going towards just being whoever I am, and accepting that whoever I am is fine and okay.
I mean, it sounds like you're in an amazing place. It sounds like you're confident. It sounds like you're so self-aware. That's the key, I think, to being content and happy, is to have that self-awareness, and to know that when something does go wrong or something does go right, you have that knowledge now of the diagnosis, and then with the communities that you can find on Instagram or other platforms, to know that you've got the network, as the support network as well. Speaking of relationships, not romantic ones, but friendships, because this is something I've struggled with in the past, and I've spoken to the other guests, and I'd love to hear your opinion on it. Do you struggle to maintain friendships?
On the whole, yes, but not always. And I don't necessarily think that's a terrible thing. And let me expand what I mean on that. So the friendships I do maintain are incredible. they're amazing people. Their values are high. They're very respectful. We don't argue, and that's not because we're avoidant. It's just because they're good people, right? And finding that network has been hard, because even I've lived in this house for a year, and there was a girl I met around the corner, and she and I are no longer friends. And so I go through a lot of people, but I don't always see that as a bad thing.
Do you think you've just got a really quick process of working out if that person's going to serve you or not, or if there's a compatibility issue? You might just have a really quick processing system.
I really do. And because I have, so one of my friends I was thinking about, one of my good friends, Kim, she we and her and I spoke about, and this is both romantically and not. She said, I don't think you give people, this was a very safe space. I was happy with the feedback. She said, I don't think you give people enough of a benefit of the doubt. And I thought, well, maybe I don't. So I tried it. And so when I started when you say like detection, because obviously I'm in business, I've got 3 businesses, and you come across a lot of people, like potential clients to work with, and networking, and who do you speak to? Then you got romantic, and then obviously you've just got friends of friends that you meet. And, they're not always bad people. They're just, are we going to clash? Are you going to bring like goodness into my life? When you walk into a room and someone either lights you up or drains you, I don't have the energy to be drained. Like, some people will have friendship groups with both people. I just don't want to be friends with somebody that drains the soul out of me, and I don't think that's a problem. And so when my friend said to me, maybe you don't give people the benefit of the doubt enough, I thought, maybe you're right. I'm open to the critique, and maybe that's maybe I do that. And so I tried it. And so people would come in, if I meet friends of friends, and a guy, let's be honest, it's generally dating, it applies to. And, you get this kind of, I wouldn't say red flag, but you get this little trigger, and you think, oh, and you want to lean into that. You want to investigate that and think, is that going to sit right with me? Is this a value that I can get on board with? Is this a behavior that, I don't mind? And whereas before I would have just gone, no. I just thought, okay, we'll just explore. We won't do anything with it. We'll just be aware of it, and we'll lean into it and see what happens. And then, 1 week, 2 weeks, I would draw the line at a month, because time is precious. But the person always ends up doing the thing that I always say, well, that was the problem in the first place. So it's like, is it that I don't give people the benefit of the doubt, or is it just that you're a bit slower at seeing this stuff than I am? And so I think it's important to know that.
I think we've got amazing intuition. You suggested it earlier. I think you said the word intuition, and like you said, you can walk into a room and read it instantly. You can tell the people that like you, the people that don't like you. You can spot the red flags instantly. And if you ignore those red flags and don't trust your gut instinct, then like you just said, they can come and bite you later on. Mm-hmm. It's so interesting, because intuition, like a heightened sense of intuition, is something that I think I've got. And every guest I've spoken to on this podcast, they've said, oh my God, yes, I have that as well. And I know it's it could be quite common to have intuition, but I swear we have incredible intuition. I think it's because we can read the little micro movements of the facial expressions, and we can pick up on everything, and we can tell when someone's not being genuine, or when someone's trying to screw us over or trying to manipulate us. Whatever it is, we can see right through people. Do you see that in yourself?
I definitely, and I really agree with you. And I think to add to that, because self-awareness is everything, and in addition to that list, I think there will also all be people that are not aware of themselves. So sometimes I know somebody else is feeling before they realize they're feeling, and then 2 weeks later they'll tell me, and I'll be like, I know, I saw that. And then it's frustrating, because you're trying to talk to somebody about a conversation they're not ready to have, because they don't know it yet. And I think that happens a lot, and it's people's lack of self-awareness sometimes, where they don't really know where they're at within themselves, and they're kind of bumbling along, and they're not moving with intent. I think that creates a friction, because we're like, well, I can see it. And because, authenticity and directness, and just that lack of abstract, it's like, well, it's confusing. And I found that confusing. And what you said about kind of heightened intuition, interestingly enough, and there's probably will be listeners that have been through a similar journey, even though I've always been that way, I've not always been that way, because I, for a very long time, turned my back on my intuition and I didn't listen to myself. And I think that comes from, I don't mind saying, I had a very violent childhood, and I was always told like the opposite of who I am. I was told of who I am by my dad. And so you kind of have this rhetoric of, no, I don't believe myself. I'm wrong. Like what I believe to be true is not accurate. And I carried that into adulthood. And so I would, I don't mind saying, I would go from like abusive relationship to abusive relationship, and I would see the red flags, and I would spend the whole time miserable, and I would go to crap jobs with crap bosses and be really uncomfortable and not like it. And there was in my gut, I would ignore myself so much that my gut would hurt, because what I learned retrospectively was, my intuition was screaming. That little girl inside me was saying, this isn't right. And I would just be going, shh, and like my body, like I would feel physically sick, and like everything about me would say, this isn't right for you. This isn't good. This isn't a good environment. And so I would listen to the voices around me, not in my head, but like the people that were saying, oh no, just stay in that job. This whole rat race thing that we're a similar age. I think you're 34 and I'm 32. But, when we were growing up, we were told, get that job, stay there for 30 years, stay raise a family, do all these things, stay in this relationship, get married and be together for 70 years, which obviously is the dream. But, there was no emphasis on be in the right relationship, be in the right job, have a career that makes you feel fulfilled, don't be afraid to be on your own, be around people that actually bring you life. And because, I had this dialogue around me and this pressure from the outside sources to just conform. And oh my gosh, I don't know about you, but I am not a conformist. And, and it was almost like I listened and I tried so hard to fit in this box that everybody wanted me to be in, that the cost of that was my intuition. And I learned, I don't know where, I couldn't tell you, but somebody said, like, if you ignore your intuition long enough, you'll lose it. And I started to pay attention to when I was hurting physically. Like, for example, I got engaged when I was 19 to a guy who's like nearly my age now at the time, which says you a lot about that relationship. And I didn't want to be with him. I only said yeah because I didn't want to say no, and it wasn't particularly pleasant. We'd lived together, we just didn't do much. We obviously engaged in some not great activities, and it was just partying. It was just escapism. And I just thought, this is just all I deserve. And I remember it was so powerful. I am getting to my point, I promise. But I was at his mum and dad's, and my wedding dress was upstairs, and we had the wedding planned, and they were talking about they wanted to go on this family holiday to Safari or whatever it was. And I threw up. I went to the toilet, I threw up physically, and because my whole body was just like, I just don't want this. And I took my wedding dress, I called my friend, I moved out the next day, and that was that. And we never spoke again. And I kind of from then really started to listen to myself. And it took me years to actually develop that self-awareness. But I think what's so important, because the guests that you've got on the show and the people that you've been speaking to, I suspect that a lot of us are a little bit longer in our journey, and there will be people that do have a heightened intuition but aren't listening to it, and to be able to physically throw up because I'm fighting my own body, you need to kind of become one with yourself, with your own mind. And when we've got a neurodivergent mind, you need to understand it before you can be one with it, right? And so I think that heightened intuition is something that we all need to really listen to, not necessarily to act on blindly, but to be able to lean into whatever our guts and our bodies and everything about ourselves is telling us to listen to.
That's so powerful. And I've spoken about intuition before with my other guests, but not like this and not in this much depth. And it's such a fascinating subject. I think what you alluded to is that could potentially be a conflict between your intuition and other personality traits, for example, being a people pleaser or avoiding conflict. So your gut and your intuition, which is most likely true might be saying that person's it's not good for me, or this situation isn't good for me, but you're wanting to not upset people or avoid confrontation is also a powerful force, pulling you in the opposite direction. And like you said, if you avoid that, if you let the people pleasing element win and you avoid the gut feeling, then eventually the physiology of it, this is the wrong word, the physical reaction to letting that build up is going to manifest itself. And like you said, you threw up. I mean, I don't know, I'm just throwing stuff out there, but that's certainly, if I look back in my past, there's been a big conflict between my intuition and my wanting to avoid conflict. And it sounds like, do you relate to that kind of conflict between one side of you being a people pleaser and the other side of you telling you, no, this person's not good for you, and they're sort of pulling in opposite directions, causing a really toxic situation?
Absolutely. And I would say I did relate to that. I'm still learning to get away from it. But two things. First of all, when you do that, you are inauthentic. Not to say you're a fake person, but it's inauthentic, because you are like, if you don't mind, speak to that situation that you gave there about your intuition and the people pleasing. You're not saying what's on your mind. You've not got the right people around you, and you won't be able to come across as your full self. And like with my example, and what I learned was, we're all great. We've got so much great potential. If we're not our full selves, we're not doing we're not giving our full goodness, I guess. And having to people please is, you need to kind of put yourself first. And I did have that. I had it, actually my last relationship, and it will be the last of its nature, actually. I knew I was getting involved in something that wasn't right, but there were kids involved. And so I thought, well, I'll try and prioritize the kids, and I prioritize everybody else's needs. And this happens in families so often, in relationships. And, eventually it nearly broke me. It was far too much. And the whole time it was my intuition saying, leave, no, not working. And I was so unhappy because I was just constantly trying to kid myself that it wasn't a big deal. And I think that does happen a lot. Especially with personality traits, when if you're minimizing yourself for anybody else, it's going to end in disaster eventually.
I think that's incredibly powerful. It's such a valuable bit of advice for anyone listening that is at a different stage in their journey to us. Is we have that self-awareness now to trust our intuition, even though we might still not act on it. It's easier said than done, but before it's caused me, and sounds like it's caused you some problems where you've ignored it, or other parts of you have won that tug of war. I guess our sensitivity to rejection and sensitivity to criticism might also be quite a powerful force, pulling us in the direction away from our intuition, especially in romantic relationships. I think back in my past, and I can pick a few moments. Do you think firstly, are you sensitive to criticism or rejection?
I'm working on it, but yeah, it's just still a fear.
It is a powerful one. I mean, for me, it can really knock me off the course for a while. And again, it was probably a force that has made me ignore my intuition in the past. I was keen to talk about romantic relationships. Are you happy to go there?
Yeah, go ahead. Open book.
What's Alia like in a relationship? If we could speak to your previous romantic partners.
Actually, I can answer that because I actually have that experience. Because after lockdown, I fostered for a year to help out, and the two that weren't really bad, actually, that they were abusive, so I couldn't speak to them. So they basically had to speak to the fostering agency. And the ones that I was with for any length of time, I got 5 out of 5 reviews. They said I was great, I was understanding, I was always supportive, I was always pushing them for goodness, and that actually went pretty well. But what they said about me wouldn't have been how I experienced things, because I'm yet to actually have one where I felt that I have flourished. They haven't always been bad. That's not, some of them not been great. But I do I've minimized myself a lot. And I think this comes down to masking, because I've not actually, since getting my diagnosis, since I'm masking, since doing all these good things, I've not been with anybody since, because to be honest, I haven't met anybody good enough. I haven't met anyone that doesn't, like, when you're thinking about it and you're, reading the room, I guess, you just think, no, that's just not for me. That's not something that, because I want somebody I can grow with, someone I can do all these amazing things with. And, they don't have to be the same, but, like, you've got this intuition, you've got this emotional intelligence, and I don't want to have to carry somebody else. When they don't have that, it's really frustrating because you have to then go and, you have to do all the work. You can't meet each other halfway and then move with it. You're just like, okay, well, you've got zero self-awareness and I have all the self-awareness, so I'll just do it all, shall I?
You've probably got so much self-awareness that you know all of the red flags now. And because you've got that intuition as well, you can pick them up so quickly. So the filtering process of knowing if someone's going to be a good match or not probably happens super quick. So actually, you don't have time for the time wasters anymore because you can just spot them a mile off.
Yeah. I think sometimes it might be nice to be naive, but reality, for it to last for 3 years and then waste my time? Like, which one would you rather have, the intuition or just have a few years of enjoyment? I don't know. So it's an interesting one. It's I think I've spent a lot of time working on me because I need to do that, but the problem is some other people aren't doing the same work. So I guess it's meeting the right person at the right time.
You mentioned imposter syndrome earlier. Do you still feel like you deal with imposter syndrome now? You mentioned just coming onto this podcast and in your work, you're a successful communications coach. Do you sometimes feel that you're not the person who should be doing what you are doing?
I think probably more than I thought, because I didn't really think it bothered me too much. I didn't think I experienced it. But then even just doing my hoovering earlier, I was just like, is he going to cancel? Like, is he just going to think, why am I speaking to her? And then I do that with clients as well. Like, I've got some amazing clients. This isn't a brag, it's just fact. We've written for articles that have gone in Push for the Kardashians magazine. We've written articles that have gone in Vogue. I've got two, the other one's not published yet, 2 published books published by Penguin for clients. They're quite famous. And there's all these different, so the tables that I sit at, sometimes I'm a bit, do you know who I'm not? Like, why am I sat at the tables? And I think sometimes, I do have to just tell myself to shut up, and I just think I'll just keep going until somebody shuts the door.
Yeah. That's amazing. I mean, what you have done is super impressive. And on the surface, you would look at someone like yourself who has done, like you said, really impressive things, and you would think that you were confident and you were self-assured and you knew your worth and you knew that you were an accomplished communications coach. And I'm the same, and pretty much everyone I've spoken to with ADHD and is the same. It's this imposter syndrome, which is, again, it's this sort of subconscious, deep feeling of inadequacy. I'm finding I'm getting slightly better at it as I do stuff that gives me more evidence of my achievements. Is there anything that you've particularly done that has overpowered that feeling of being an imposter, like a particular event or a particular contract you've signed or a particular dinner you've been to that has been the evidence required to kick imposter syndrome to the curb?
I think mine's probably very similar to you. I think one of the nice things I'm seeing at the moment, and this is such a weird thing, but because working on my brand, I want to do more public speaking and kind of getting out there. So on my LinkedIn, which is where I'm very active, I do lots of regular videos and I talk to the audience. And I kind of had to kick myself out of the house as of January to try and get back out there, go networking and go to more events. And I haven't been to a single event where there hasn't been, 1 or 2 people that said, oh, you're that communications lady on LinkedIn. And it's that whole, oh, right. And then they will tell you what you've been talking about and then start sharing their stories with you. And I love that. And I just think Oh, okay. So it's a bit like seeing the social post, but in reverse now. It's that doing that for other people. Oh yeah, that relate. I like, so obviously with communications coaching, communication is so difficult for all of us. You know, it's all of our responsibility, but it's also a two-way street. So as much as I can work on myself, I mean, I do this for a living and I still have arguments. So it's not about, oh, I've cured you. You're an amazing communicator now. It's actually just having the tools to rely on, and even I don't rely on them all sometimes, and people in neurodiversity have more issues to contend with. But being able to talk about this stuff and people to come to me and say that made me feel so much better, or reading my book and being able to say, oh, it makes so much sense. And like in coaching, just that the fact that people get it, first of all, to me is a case study that I'm not just talking rubbish. And seeing that difference, that change, it's just a small slight edge that makes all the difference. It's not rocket science. I don't reinvent the wheel. It's just helping people see things in a different way, which I guess is grateful for my brain. But once they have that shift themselves, for me, that's like, do you know what? Yeah, I do know what I'm doing, and I do know what I'm talking about, because I see that growth in others and I love that growth.
There'll be some people who will see your LinkedIn posts and see your videos and think that Alia's got it cracked, and she knows what she's doing, and she doesn't have bad days, and she knows she has all the answers to this. Firstly, do you suffer from burnout? And if you do, what advice could you have for anyone to A, maybe avoid it, or B, when it's happening, to how to deal with it?
Very good question. Yes, because what goes up must come down. Nothing about me is linear. I still struggle, and you know, I have sensory issues all the time. I'll have good and bad days in one day. I'll go up, I'll go down. I mean, you already know this, but I even left my car running for a whole hour yesterday. I walked out the car, left the car on, went to the gym, came back, and my car's just sat there, and I was like, okay, I did that. And in terms of burnout, I get it quite badly. It used to be a lot more regular and longer. So it would happen for like 2 weeks, and I'd just be in bed, wouldn't speak to anyone. I would work with my laptop, duvet around me, bitter and angry. And I was in this state of, I just can't get out of it. That's lessened now, and I'll talk about the tips as how I got there. I don't think it will ever go away. As much as I would love it to. I would love to try medication and see if that helps with the balancing a bit, but it's not where I'm at. And first of all, my diagnosis helped a lot, because it helped me understand, well, okay, you know, I'm not just a psycho bitch. I have actually got a reason as to why I don't feel great today. It allowed me to recognize, and this resonates actually, I don't want to hijack what your first guest said, because it's very similar, but I was able to kind of understand when I get triggered. And I don't have a grasp of this, and definitely not perfect, but it helps. And so when I know, you know, somebody's parked outside in my bay, okay, what do we do about it? You know, if I had, you know, if somebody's just been rude, or like somebody's been passive aggressive, and social injustice is a big thing for me. So I can't stand bullies, and I could see something happening. I'm like, well, okay, this is going to set me off like at least a day. So kind of knowing and seeing, oh, my energy is about to drop, I'm about to crash, or for example, and this is not healthy and I don't condone it, I've accidentally allowed myself to have 13 back-to-back meetings on Tuesday. So what I would have done in the past would have spent my whole Easter stressing about it, and I would have been panicking, and it would have been stressful, and I would have gone to every meeting hating it. Now I just know it's coming. It's fine. It's going to be hard. I'm going to do some self-care in the evening. I'm going to have a massage. And I think what really helps me, and I do forget to do this sometimes, I have to remind myself, is to have a list of all the things that bring me joy. And whether it's, I love my dog, but even my dog annoys me when I'm at this horrible thing. Does. So I've got a Rottweiler Shar Pei. He's quite heavy, and I have a waist belt for him. And sometimes he gets excited and he pulls, you know. And even that, like, if I'm triggered and I'm in burnout and I'm just like, my energy is just gone, and I call it zombie mode. That's my burnout, zombie mode. When my dog is pulling, it's like so irritating. So, even saying being with my dog, that's not enough. It's not walking around here where there's cars and traffic and people and they just annoy me. It's getting out into the mountains. It's going to Snowdon. It's swimming in a waterfall with him. It's being away from everybody. Even if I want to shout and scream, nobody can hear you. And it's kind of being super specific about what part of what I enjoy. So we like going to the beach, and I like going to the beach at 5 a.m. in the morning. Nobody's there. I can take my dog off the lead so he's not pulling me, and I'll just run with him into the water, and he loves that and I love it too. So it's kind of finding exactly what I enjoy and just doing more of it, because you can't avoid it. I have to accept it. I'm just in this space. And I think I've come onto this call actually in a really good mood, which is helpful. I can change in the same day. So I think just being patient with yourself, knowing what works, and just not forcing it. So when I was going for 2 weeks and they were really bad, it was horrible, so bad. But I would be angry at myself and I'd be like, just do it, just get on with it, just crack on. If I have to, I will just move my meetings. There's nothing you can't do. If I hire somebody, bring some in, ask for help, push something back until you're in a different space. Those 13 meetings, and this isn't going to happen, but if I got to Tuesday and I couldn't do it, no one's going to die if I just say, listen, would it be okay if we rearrange? Even if I rearranged half of them. There's so many things at our disposal. It's just kind of getting over ourselves a little bit to be able to give ourselves permission to say it's okay that we're not okay right now.
Really, really good advice. To don't beat yourself up if you have too many meetings. Like you said, if you zoom out and actually what you're stressing about now isn't really a big deal, it's not going to be an issue probably in 24 hours time. Don't beat yourself up too much. And you can, like you said, you can cancel a meeting, you can move it back. Nothing's going to happen. And that comes with that self-awareness, I think, and to know when you've perhaps got a little bit too much on. I think that's a really nice place to end the conversation. I think that's super advice to finish on. Where can people find you if they want to hear more or speak to you a bit?
So LinkedIn is probably the best place. I will give you my links if that's okay, and we can put them below or wherever or somewhere. So I'm Alia Coster. So just find me on LinkedIn, or our website is the 4 pillars. So that .co.uk. You'll find us on our socials on there, and anyone can kind of reach out if they kind of have any questions or kind of just want to share their story, really, because I've always got an open door and I'm happy to listen.
Amazing. That will all flash up on the screen, all those details. Thank you so much, Alia. I've certainly learned a lot just from hearing you. The advice you said in the last bit to avoid burnout actually really, really helped me, and I've absolutely no idea that no doubt that it will help the listeners. So thank you for being so honest and so open, and to share your story with such vulnerability and honesty. It's going to help people. People will listen to this. People like you who have done really interesting things, to hear that actually you deal with the good stuff and you deal with the bad stuff just like everyone else. It really will bring home a more balanced narrative around what it's like to live with ADHD and be neurodivergent, and make people feel like they're heard. So thank you so much for coming on. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.